Hey guys, welcome to Ken's Money Matters, and here we talk about the money mindset. We talk about how to get that money, have that income, how to manage that money, how to have fun with that money, how to invest that money, and how to assure a lifetime of constant and consistent income, basically financial freedom. Welcome guys. So today I'm going to look at why we need an emergency fund. As financial coaches, we always speak about emergency fund. Every time we talk to you, we tell you, do you have an emergency fund? But what's an emergency fund? And why do you need it actually? Why do you actually need to have an emergency fund before you begin investing or paying off debt or whatever it is? I'm going to give you some reasons that I believe are very important and why emergency fund is something that is so critical to your journey to financial freedom. Number one, emergency fund is basically money that can cover certain unexpected expenses. There's so many things that happen in life. You know, our life is just full of drama sometimes, you know, things hitting you from left, right, center, whatever. But you need to secure and insure yourself against these things. Basically, you need to be in a position to cover these expenses so that are unexpected without, you know, going into debt or without liquidating your investments or without, doing things that you don't want to do, basically. So in this case, an emergency fund is important from different levels, and I'm going to give you reasons why it's very necessary to have an emergency fund. Number one, I believe that an emergency fund gives you peace of mind, and me, there's nothing as important as having peace of mind. Knowing that if my car breaks down today, I can sort it out. Knowing that if my house is leaking today, I can sort it out. Knowing that if I leave my job today, I can actually live my life normally, and that's the work of an emergency fund. And knowing that if my mom calls or someone calls and they need something attended to urgently, or my health, basically, I need to go to a hospital or I'll go to my dentist or something like that, I know I'm covered. So that peace of mind that it gives you, the peace of mind it gives you to do other things, to focus on your investments, to run your life as usual and to do things that you love doing, is very important. So an emergency fund will give you peace of mind. You will know that at the back of it, you're secure, someone got your back. It's the same way you always feel secure when someone has your back. When you know that, okay, if this particular plan fails, I have option B. You feel much secure and more confident going into that plan, knowing that despite what happens, you have something to fall back on. That's the work of an emergency fund. And that's number one reason why I believe we should have an emergency fund. Number two is basically to ensure that your investment goals are met as soon as possible and as efficient as possible. This is because most of the time, if you have an emergency and you cannot cover it, the next thing you're looking into is either you're going into debt or you're going to mess up with your investment plan. And that's not something you really want. You don't want to be liquidating a long-term investment plan because you face an emergency, because these emergencies will always be happening. So imagine how many times you'll interfere with your investment because you want to cover an emergency. How long will it take you to get to your goal? That's a very important question to ask yourself. You don't want to be messing up with your long-term investments each time you have an emergency. So for you to make sure that you achieve your long-term goals, emergency fund is going to act as your security at the door. And that way you are able to achieve your goal in an efficient manner with less stress and in less time. So an emergency fund is extremely necessary at that particular point. Number three, why do you need an emergency fund? Let's say you're paying off debts. So if you're someone who has debt and you're trying to get to financial freedom, basically you're moving from what we call a debt life, whereby you have debts and they are not financially independent as such, and to a point whereby you're financially solvent and financially free, you need to pay your debts first. Now imagine you're paying your debts and then you still have to worry about so many things, your car breaking down and stuff like that. So you, in the process of paying debts, you set a goal, you set an objective for your debts, and then something happens. Therefore, you have to cancel paying your debts, and then they will continue earning interest as you deal with emergency. So if someone who is serious about paying their debts and remaining debt-free, you need that financial independence. You need that opportunity to just focus on those debts and not worry about, the small expenses that may come up, like your car, like your light, like your house, like things like that, basically. Emergency fund is extremely important in that sense that it will help you get out of debt much faster in a much efficient way. Another reason why you may need or you might need emergency fund is when you own a house. So those who own a house, it means basically you are responsible for everything that happens in the house. So if the house is leaking, anything is broken in the house, you will be responsible for it. And those who own houses know how expensive it is to actually run an old house. There is always something that needs fixing. You don't want to be messing up with your investments, messing up with your financial journey, and messing up with your financial plan because you have to fix the electricity or you have to fix some plumbing issue in the house, because those things will always come up. You don't want to be messing up with your investments to cover such expenses. It will interfere with the whole journey of financial freedom. So you want to have some money somewhere such that if something happens, you are insured in that sense. And even besides messing up with your investments, you want to know that when these things occur, and if they're urgent, like a house leak, you can cover it. You don't want to be living in a house that's leaking. So emergency fund comes at very different levels, and it does help a lot. So another reason why you may need an emergency fund is basically loss of job. So we never know what happens. Everything happens. Like COVID-19 happens, so many people lost their jobs, and everyone was basically so worried about how their life will turn out. So imagine you have a family, you have people depend on you, and then you lose your job because of COVID. You're definitely going to be affected. And if you're affected in that sense, I would assume that if you had an emergency fund, let's say it covers 3 months expenses to 6 months of expenses, you are free to live for 6 months or 3 months without worrying about the job. So basically you can focus on looking for that job. So it ensures you against anything like that, any employment issues, any job loss or stuff like that. So in that sense, again, it means you are secure and you feel confident that if anything happens, you have enough time to go back to the job market, look for something to do, or even sharpen your skills so that you can start earning some money. So that kind of assurance, I believe, is quite important, and it gives you that peace of mind I was talking about in the beginning. Again, that's a very important reason why you may need an emergency fund. You may also need an emergency fund because of health bills and health insurances. There are some countries that have very expensive health systems. So it's basically necessary to have some cash that can help you in case of any health issues. So these are some of the reasons you may need an emergency fund. And there are so many reasons. It's basically a good security to have. I always say the main thing again is it helps you build a foundation. If you want to start a long-term investing, you need a strong foundation. The foundation here is you have an emergency fund and your expenses are well taken care of. So you know that whatever happens even in the market or when you invest your money, you don't have to interfere with it. Because for those of us who invest, for example, in the stock market, there's always, going down, going up, there are fluctuations and volatility in the market. And you don't want to be depending on that as the money that you can liquidate. I want to know that, it doesn't matter what's happening in the market. I have a very long-term outlook with regards to the market, and I'm not worried about short-term volatility. In that sense, I'm secured in terms of my expenses. I'm secured because I have my emergency fund, and I do not worry so much about what's happening with my investment. I have my eyes on the goal. But if you don't have any emergency funding, you'll be like, you're going to lose your money. You see the market coming down and you feel you're scared. Then you get out of the market and you lose money in the process. While after a few days, the market rebounds, So at the end of the day, you can't achieve your goals, and it really interferes with your long-term financial goals. So in that sense, again, I always say it's a foundation on which your investment house is built. And for me, that foundation is extremely important. So make sure that you have an emergency fund. So how much of an emergency fund should you have anyways? It's basically just 3 months expenses to 6 months. But I always say that's not actually the issue. For me, personally, I would look at my life, what I need, and how my life is running, and how much I need. So this is very personal. I wouldn't just put it as 3 months expenses or so. But as a general rule, you should have 3 months of expenses to 6 months of expenses. And some people do even up to a year of expenses. So if in a year I spend $100,000, I need to have $100,000 that's liquid. That's money I can access anytime. And just to mention, an emergency fund is not an investment. So you don't have to worry about tying it down and getting interest and stuff. You just have to worry about keeping it somewhere it's not losing so much. So even if you're getting an interest rate of like 2%, the fact is you can access that money at the click of a button. You can use it anytime you want to use it because it's an emergency money. It's an emergency fund. It's not an investment. So it's not bad to earn some interest on it if you can, but you must be able to access that money when you need it. And you also have to be disciplined enough to access that money only when you have an emergency. And that's also important because some people always make every single thing in their life emergency. So basically impulse buying becomes emergency to them. If you're not disciplined enough in the world of finance, it's hard to make it. So you have to be disciplined enough to know that, okay, this is what I regard as emergency, and emergencies can be so varied. I can't mention all of them, but this is why I need this money. This is at the time that I need this money to help me. Make sure it's actually an emergency and not basically drinking in the bar or doing some crazy stuff or, going to have fun with the emergency fund. it doesn't make sense to interfere with your journey. So it is important to have an emergency fund. So finally, how do you think you can set up an emergency fund? It's a very simple step actually. You just need to do what we did with the budgeting, and you need to watch the video on budgeting. And when you're budgeting, the first thing you need to do before you start even working on your desk and stuff like that is make sure that you have an emergency fund. Basically cut down some spending and, have a target every single month. Know that, okay, I'm building this account. Every single month I'm going to be putting this much in this account to ensure that I'm secure. You don't have to have a lump sum, but if you have a lump sum somewhere, it's easier to transfer it and put it as an emergency fund and start building the savings account. So you can have a savings account, have an emergency account, have your investment account. All these things are different, but you must have a target. How much do you want to put in there? By what time? How much can you be putting every single month? And have these goals in mind. It's a very simple process. Just set a goal for it, do it every single month, and be consistent and be disciplined, really is. And just cut your expenses. If you want to build it as fast as possible, cut your expenses down, reduce your spending, and build the emergency fund. So it's very easy to set up an emergency fund. And this one can be anywhere. Like I said, you just need to find a good place for it. It doesn't need to be something that's earning high interests. It just needs to be accessible to you. So a lot of people do ask if it's important to pay that first or set up an emergency fund first. I would say you should have the emergency fund before you go into anything else. The emergency fund provides the foundation. So I hope I've tackled the importance of emergency fund. I've tackled the reasons why you need an emergency fund. And now you know what to do to actually set up an emergency fund. Thank you guys, and I hope you like the video. If you like it, please smash that button, share the video, and leave any comments or suggestions below. I'm always open to suggestions. Thank you, people. Till next time.